Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Glad to have y'all here, and welcome back. Hope everybody's having a good week, and welcome to Parshat Ki Tavo and our Torah reading for this week, and our commentary with Rabbi Sacks on the God of History. Before we dive in, any thoughts, comments, reactions?
So I just wanted to say to Barbara Royal, thank you for the story that she shared last week about the return of Stuart's wallet by a homeless person. I thought it was really profound, and I think I've told it twice, once for sure, but maybe twice. So Barbara, Aylin, you weren't here. Stuart, you want to tell it real? I don't know. The rabbi can decide if it's worth retelling, but I did think it was a profound story and a good personal experience that we don't hear about very often.
Well, and it's good to share these things, to pass it on,
Right,
forward, as it were.
right.
Yeah.
And Rabbi, how do we access the recording? And we always get this notice you're recording, but how do we get to it?
It's on YouTube, and I upload the videos to YouTube after class.
Okay.
So if you ever miss a class and want to see what was discussed, like those watching on YouTube right now, I guess, in the future when they're watching it. I feel like Mel Brooks in Spaceballs at the moment. But when? Right now. At some point, those watching it are watching it on YouTube, and if you ever miss, you can do the same.
But is there a link from the website?
We have a YouTube channel. I believe there's a link to the YouTube channel on the website, but not to this particular recording. You'd have to find the playlist. It's called the Beit Midrash, so you can find it. All right. Yes, Barbara Brandy.
Okay, I waited my 10 seconds. How many of you think we heard this story before? We heard this goal before. It bugged me so badly. I guess I should correct my English, TK, but I had to go back and look it up. He has the same moral to this story that he mentions back from Parsha Bo, which is know your history. It's your identity. Repeat, 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 repeat. And it's a valuable lesson. And I think what's really nice about what he does here is say, okay, for Jews, you hear this at Passover, you hear this, you do that, you do the other thing, all of which is designed to remind you of where you came, what you learned, etc. But I love how when you read other things from Rabbi Sacks, he compares it to other societies. He talks about England. There's a website for the Sacks Legacy Society, and they go back and bring up his old writings. And he does a wonderful job there of discussing an LBJ comment, a Lyndon Johnson comment about immigrants and their value to American society. So talking about history is an important part of our identity. I agree with that. He thought it was so important that he repeated himself back from pages 78 and 79. Barbara, I don't know if you've gotten to that page yet in the book, but yeah, I'm happy to.
I kind of picked up on that also, and my thought on that is my homiletics teacher in school, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, says, rabbis at any given time really only have 4 or 5 sermons that they ever give. And those 4 or 5 sermons are just dressed up in different ways based on the parsha. But it's essentially the same sermon over like 4 or 5 times. Like the really good ones, those 4 or 5 things change over time for the really good rabbis. But, you listen closely enough, every rabbi essentially has 4 or 5 sermons. So this seems to be one of his, about the importance of the stories we tell.
Maybe you're suggesting that it occurs more than just the one other time that I found. Maybe there are 3 or 4 other additional times.
I felt like there's been a couple times he's talked about stories, and there have been a couple times he's talked about. He had a section in here in this where he talked. I'll find it quickly, where he talks about how the Enlightenment. Where was it?
Yeah.
He talks about how the Enlightenment tried to base identity on nation, race, or class, and then the 60s, it was each of us creates our own identity. I'm pretty sure he's used that a couple times in this book as well, but that's okay.
Well,
doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means we get to review it and refresh our memory of it, and it comes back to our minds again. TK.
I just wanted to add on to that writers have, the same basic plots exist for almost all stories. And it is about how you tell it and how you weave it with your own style that makes a difference. I think I forgot what book it's in, but there's nothing new under the sun. Is often quoted in terms of writers. So I don't have a problem with him repeating. I thought it was very, very interesting and thought-provoking. And I'm still cogitating on it, but I think that whole thing about the individual versus the group, and in the context of who are we, is worth thinking about more than once. It's an ongoing issue, conundrum, puzzlement that we have to work out over and over again. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give the impression that I thought it was a problem. I do think he's emphasizing something he cared about. Sorry to interrupt, TK.
That's okay. I think
Yes.
I have a period here.
Lisa.
Rabbi Sacks in his book Lessons in Leadership, he mentions Howard Gardner, who is a very renowned Harvard professor of education psychology. And what he says is Gardner's argument is that what makes a leader is the ability to tell a particular kind of story, one that explains ourselves to ourselves and gives power and resonance to a collective vision. So, this is a thread that we see all over in different areas of our life.
Lisa.
Yeah, so what I found really interesting, and I think it's such an important idea and lesson for this very moment in time, is that identity and our narrative, which creates our identity as a group, as a people, is so important, and it is, I think, part of our survival. But that there's also sort of the negative of identity that it can create in us and a them, and one group thinking that it's better than another group, we see that today, I think, with the identity politics, and people very much having an identity as a political group, one political group or another political group, and each one thinking they're superior to the other. So I think the thing we have to do is maintain our narrative and identity, but be open and accepting to other narratives and other identities existing outside of us.
Helen?
I'm just wondering how many of this group have actually had to write a history, either of themselves or, better yet, of their family. I'm struggling, but I'm doing it. I'm trying very hard, but it's full of surprises. What essentially I set out to do is a simple kind of ethical will, not for myself so much as to decipher my dad and how he felt about that sort of thing. And the deeper I go, the more I understand who I am. It's an interesting reversal in process.
Margaret?
I wanted to say two things. One is very simply to point out, that what the liturgy does. I mean, the liturgy tells the story, these story about us over and over and over again. So we hear that and get that reinforced as often as we show up in synagogue. The other one was that I was very interested in the comments of Pope Francis in regard to what Lisa said, that he made some comments recently saying that, that Catholics don't have the only way, that there are, multiple, that there are multiple ways to connect with God, and that they are and that they are equally valid. And it's a way, I thought, of somebody who is, has a lot of power to say pretty much what Lisa was saying, that you don't need to be in identity groups that exclude each other or say that one is better than the other. DeBarty.
Stuart? Stuart, you're muted.
Here we are at the end of the Torah almost, and it's clear in this chapter and really through much of the Torah that the story is pointed towards the Jews going into the land of Canaan to Israel, and that God is giving the land to the Jewish people. So it's always confused me how people can argue whether the Jews should be in Israel or not, but nobody has any close to the thousands of years that the Jews have this down in writing and tell the story that this is our land. How, if you get in a discussion or a debate, even an argument about the Jews being rightfully in this land, how can people argue against it?
I think, look, the easy answer to that is the Torah is pretty clear on the fact that there are people who are currently living in the land when the Israelites go in. And that the Israelites conquer the land from other people. Now, the Moabite, there's really no evidence that the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, really no evidence that they existed beyond the biblical period. Certainly, they probably did not survive the Assyrian Empire, and if they did survive the Assyrian Empire, they almost certainly didn't survive the Babylonian Empire.
As a people.
As a people, correct. So, trying to say that, the Jews took it from people from the very beginning has some truth to it, because the Torah is pretty clear on that. Although, you read the book of Judges, it's not so clear that they just, waltzed in and conquered everything. As one of my professor, my Bible teacher, Bernie Levinson, once said, the book of Joshua describes the way this was supposed to happen. It's like the ideal view where the Israelites march in and they make circles around Jericho and the walls fall down and they're able to destroy it. The book of Judges is a little more of a newspaper account of what actually happened. What happened? They come in, they have some victories, they have some defeats. Sometimes they end up living side by side with those who are in the land, and they just kind of, make life happen the way it is. That seems to be a little more accurate of a description of how things probably historically happened, rather than, Joshua led them in and they just, waltzed through the country and taking over everything that happened from there. Does that kind of answer your question, Stuart? I will just amend briefly to say, while that part of the claim might be true, the Palestinians claiming to be their descendants is a little problematic, historically speaking. They probably are not. They are more likely connected with the Islamic conquest that happened, 1,500 years after the Israelites would have entered the land of Israel. So in that sense, that's where that argument is kind of flawed. Is that, did the Israelites come in and conquer the land? Yes, that's pretty clear from the Torah of what happened. And there were other people in the land when they did that. Did those people end up becoming the Palestinians? Probably not. There doesn't seem to be any historical evidence for that to have happened. Does that kind of help you out, Stuart?
Yeah, we have our next door neighbors are Christian Palestinians, and they had in 1948 they lost the land. They were somewhere in East Jerusalem. They had land that they owned, and they say that that's their land today, and they're not going to settle for any peace until their land is given back to them. So that's one of the problems that I face currently.
Yeah, I mean, look, peace is going to be a difficult thing to achieve, for the lone fact that both sides are kind of digging in their heels of no peace unless X. So it's going to be hard to get there, realistically. Barbara?
I think we have.
Well,
I think we have.
but when I thought he was asking a theoretical question, my thoughts were not that I'm trying to argue against us belonging in Israel, because I believe that we do, but I was here first is not the way things are determined. I mean, are we giving the United States back to the Native Americans? We are not. So it's a sort of a fallacious argument to begin with. It's not, you don't call dibs on the land. But now, on the other hand, if within 100 years, your family owned property, that's a whole more personal thing. We're not talking about 500 years ago or whatever. So that's tough. I think just being sympathetic, because that's a pain.
Yeah, I mean, this little strip of land the size of New Jersey, in the course of 3,000 plus years, has been, passed over and conquered and reconquered and taken from this person to that person so many times. It's kind of hard to keep track of all of it. But yes, that is not really how this works in politics. You have a valid point. Yes. Lynn, you were going
Don't
to
we,
say something.
don't we have different identities which would allow us to not be divisive? For instance, we as Americans have memory, have history and memory. And we've been told by Martin Luther King and all people that came before us. And then we have the Constitution that says we the people. Isn't that a strong identity as an American, and therefore that would connect us in some way to other people who also have different identities?
Yeah.
Yes. So I will say a tiny bit about that, only because this is a subject a little bit of one of my high holiday sermons, so I don't want to spoil too much. Yes, but our identities as Americans are now getting divided as well, and the stories we're telling based on those identities don't necessarily align. And my part of my argument is they're not designed, the stories that are being told are not designed to bring us together as a country. They're designed to keep us divided apart for other purposes. So in that sense, yeah, if we can change the narrative to something that's more unified, that should be what we're trying to do. Yes. But that's not what we're currently seeing. Eddie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, this ties into what y'all were saying. I think what we do when we tell our personal history, we want it to sound as good as possible. And even the way he's stated this idea is make sure the story you tell is one that speaks to our highest aspirations and tell it regularly. I think we need to say higher aspirations, because we all in our personal lives, and as Jewish people and in this country, we all have things we're not proud of, but we do have to tell the true history and try to do better, because we'll never meet our highest aspirations, in my opinion. In Alabama, especially as a state, we've told stories for years that neglect a lot of our true history. And, even to the point of taking the state history textbook out of the curriculum so that we don't teach things that we don't want to teach. Ellen had recommended a children's book to me that I don't think, my great niece is quite ready for, but I did find an introductory book for her that she can read first and then go to that. So we do need to tell all of our history.
So, this is an interesting point of there's history and there's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And on some level, yes, we need to face history, because if we don't, what's the Centennial quote, right? Like, if we don't, those who don't learn history are destined to repeat it, something along that line. He said it, he actually had a slightly different formulation, but that's the idea. We need to learn from our histories so that we can grow and learn and do better. That you can't do tshuva if you don't admit the mistakes that you had made in the past. But we can still tell stories that teach the values that we want to adhere to and that we want to pass down to future generations, and that mark our highest aspirations of who we are and the times we did get there. The times we did live up to who we wanted to be. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think that's my main point, is we can tell stories that teach us the values of growing and still face our history of when we didn't get there to be able to grow from it and try to get there. Yes, TK.
Just would like to throw in a question here. The conversation about history versus story, where does truth come in? Just throwing it out.
Well, I think historians do their best to tell the truth, although you read different historians talking about the same story, it can be very different. But if it's really, once it's down in writing, at least, if you get somebody to put it down in writing, then you can all agree at least what somebody's trying to tell you. If you can't agree, eventually it becomes a myth, which is, doesn't mean it's not true, but myth has this mystical feeling about it. And the Torah is written down. So I think at least we know what we're talking about because it's written down.
I do want to say, there's an entire area of academic scholarly research called historiography. You guys familiar with it?
Yeah.
Historiography, for those who don't, is the study of how historians write history. And essentially, the argument is every historian writes the history from a particular perspective. So that, even the historians that we're reading are not entirely objective in their history telling.
Does that make them legit?
Yes, it does, as long as you acknowledge that it's a piece of a larger puzzle.
Is it perspective that people in Springfield are eating cats and dogs?
Is it perspectum? I'm not sure.
No, I think
That's my
there's
point.
right, but there's no such thing as 100% objective. That just does not exist. So what we're talking about is just within a narrow band, there's still going to be some fluidity about how you present something, because look, something happens with your sister and it's you too, and you're two people and you still don't agree with what happened. So everyone sees things from their own perspective, and it's hard to take that out completely.
So, I think that's a little bit where I'm trying to go with what Barbara Allen said. There's trying to remember exactly the old proverb of, there's three versions of a story: yours, mine, and what actually happened. And I think I guess maybe in my perspective, the best way to look at it, TK, is that God understands the truth. God knows what the truth is. We, in our limited intellectual perspectives, are not able to do that. At least not in its full entirety. So we can get pieces of it, and we can try to read. You can try to read multiple historians on the same topic to try to piece together more of a puzzle to understand what the actual history was. But even that's going to be a little bit. You're still going to get only some piece of what the truth of that time period actually was. Anne?
Me? Did you say
Anne.
that? Oh,
Anne.
Anne. Okay, Anne.
I think there's a distinction, a very real distinction can be between truth and facts. Dogs and cats in Springfield, I happen to think are factual. I'm not there, but I think that's fact. Now, if you talk about truth, capital T, all caps, that gets to be subjective, but surely there are some things that are factual that people can agree upon. Or not.
Well, it may
So-
be worth just emphasizing what was written in this particular chapter. He was talking about on page 284 that European Enlightenment focused on two universalisms, science and philosophy. Science aims at discovering laws that are universally true. Philosophy aims at disclosing universal structures of thought. So I think that there's some distinction there between the truth, what science is trying to discover, and other modes of thought, which might be what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, like there's an entire branch of philosophy, epistemology, that tries to deal with how do we know anything is true? How do we know what the truth is? How do we know anything? I think I got a headache in that section of philosophy class when I took it. I'm like, this just hurts. Epistemology may or may not, I'm trying to remember. Epistemology certainly had an influence on why I did not become a philosophy major, because I was just like, I can't do this. But I was, as you were reading that, I was thinking, there's a paragraph we say on Yom Kippur after the Al-Khair. So after we sit there and we hit our chests about all the things we've done wrong, there's a paragraph that says, God, it asks God to forgive us for the revealed and the unrevealed. It says, for the revealed, we already confessed. For those that we don't, that the unrevealed, those that we didn't say, you already know. Like you, God, already are aware of it. And so, and it cites a verse like the hidden is the hidden belongs to God. We know what we know, and I think it's good for us humans to remember there are things we don't know, and that's okay. And we might not ever fully understand everything. I do think there is a difference between facts that we can verify and show in truth. But, the facts influence the truth. But you need to be able to prove those facts to be able to do that. Yes, Lisa.
So I think in a sense, all history is a story. Maybe the difference is that when you write a history, as historians they try to be as accurate and factual as possible, as opposed to when you're telling a story, you have some leeway to embellish. But I think, one of the problems is with our education system is that, for most of grade school and maybe all the way through high school, you're using textbooks, and textbooks are, taught as these are the facts of this is actually what happened. You don't even know who wrote the textbook, so you don't know what lens they're writing it through. And I think kids need to understand that even textbooks are written through a lens. The way our American story is told of conquest of the land is told from the conquestor's point of view and not the Native American point of view. Maybe now they're putting the other in. I would hope so. But anyway, I think, it's just important for kids to be taught that all history is written through a lens. And it's good to understand who wrote it so you understand what that lens is.
Agreed. And I want to say two things. One goes a little bit back to what Eddie was saying before, is, there is a little bit of a move in our education system away from things that make us unhappy or uncomfortable. We're not proud of some of the things that we have done in the past, so we try to skip over them educationally because we don't want our kids to learn about it. I do think that's a mistake, and I do think that, and I thought that's where you were going initially, Lisa, which is why it came to mind and I want to point it out. As I tell B'nai Mitzvah students, even, you don't grow from being comfortable. You need to, you have to come to terms with the things that don't make you happy, with the things that are uncomfortable, with the things that you don't like, so that you can learn from them and move on from them. To your point, yes, I think there is a point of, I'm wondering if there is any historiography on like middle school and high school textbooks, because that would be a fascinating area. But I think my only question, and I'm not equipped to answer this question, is pedagogically, what age can you do that at? You don't want to be telling a 7-year-old, well, yes, here's the book we're going to learn from, but it's not entirely true, because then at some point, like, well, why are we reading it if it's not, like, why am I learning from this if it's not true? It's going to confuse them from a developmental standpoint. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. At what point can you really start to have that conversation of, the textbooks only gave you a limited amount of information because that's all they could do. There's a much larger picture here that you need to be aware of. And I don't know the answer of when that's developmentally appropriate to do. TK?
I'm just resonating with what you're saying here, because one of the things that I have tried to talk to the students about is how to determine what is true and what isn't, and how to recognize what is propaganda versus what is history. And it's a very difficult topic to try to transverse, because, as has been said today, all history is written through a certain lens. And even I'm going to add to that, even science is looking through certain lenses. For years and years and years, science was making statements based on scientific experiments, mostly with men, and leaving out women entirely, and probably leaving out racial groups as well. And so science is having it, the lens shifts, and what is true gets reorganized. I told my students yesterday that science has now discovered brain cells in your gut. So the old wisdom about, well, my gut says this and that, and is actually maybe based on reality. And we're finding out that, I just read today that people's moods, or not just moods, but mental states, can be influenced by the biome in your, yeah. And so we're like, whoa, who are we gets challenged. Part of who we are is actually a product of what we eat. Go, Barbara.
You got to be more specific than that, TK.
Okay,
I saw Barbara Brandy slightly before I saw Barbara Allen. So.
In support of what TK says, yeah, the science can have issues, but in public schools, books are selected that the school can buy are selected by a committee, and the committees often have very specific goals that don't have anything to do with the true science. And one of the examples of that is how long evolution has been kept out of science textbooks in a number of states. Texas sells far more textbooks than anybody else does or buys. And so publishers were writing books specifically to be accepted by the education selection committees in Texas. And then a whole bunch of other states, including Alabama, jumped on the bandwagon. I haven't been participating in that in a long time, so I don't know if it's been fixed or not. But the books are selected by a committee. Thank you, Rabbi. Get out there and push.
Barbara Halen, you.
Well, I don't know how helpful this is, but in the idea of how to teach students to look at bias, to look at what's true and what's not, I think the reason it's so difficult is a lot of it depends on the, what do you call it? The mindset of the person writing it. Are they trying to write the facts, or are they trying to push a certain point of view? And it's kind of hard to always know that. And it's certainly not black and white. It's definitely a blurred progression.
It's on the side of the refrigerator.
Other thoughts, comments?
Can we talk about the Bikurim and how we tell that story still today by what's on our kitchen or what's on our dining room table?
In what sense are you saying that?
Well, are you having apples and honey? And my question about apples and honey is that teaches us something about our history. Why do we have, where does he say exactly what all those first fruits are? Apples and honey may not be one of the, I know, but the honey is, if you're talking about date honey or something like that. So
was it offered? Honey was not offered on the altar.
Dates weren't they? Don't make me go to Mr. Google and look this up.
I say, so first of all, the Bikurim, this isn't the right season for it anyway.
No, but my point was, if we are teaching, we teach our families things about their history because of our practice. And maybe because I'm the one that always fixes the meals or makes up the menu, I think, what are we saying by having this? What are we saying by having that? What are we reminding ourselves by doing this or that? Somebody else was going to say something, it sounds like. And I think it's a great way to share the story and to tell things and to teach things. I think everybody could say, whether you're Sephardic diet, whether it's an Ashkenazic diet, our foods build our Jewish identity, support our stories about our Jewish identity. And here we're talking about the first fruits. And if he says it, I'm missing exactly what the first fruits are, but it's dates and it's wheat and it's this and it's that and the other thing. So Rabbi, can you give 5 of
grapes was one.
Grapes is one.
So here's kind of what I'll say. I'll say 2 things. One, I think first, what's really fascinating about this section of the Torah, that's cited, Deuteronomy chapter 26, I think it's really verses 1 through 10, but he cites here just 5 through 10, is one of the very, very few actual liturgical pieces in the entire Tanakh. Very rarely does the Torah or the Tanakh say, you shall recite this. It almost never happens. This is almost everything that we recite. Generally, the rabbis reinterpret from the Torah to apply it, like they pull it out from the Torah and then liturgicize it. If I'm inventing verbs, which I like to do, for those who have been who've been part of this class for a while, I like to invent verbs periodically. But this is one of the very few actual pieces of liturgy that exist in the Tanakh. And what's the gist of it? I have fruit that I have grown in the land that God has given, and this is how I got it. Like, here is a summary of our national history that has led me to this moment to have this fruit to offer back to you in gratitude for making it to this moment, which is a kind of powerful statement in the first place, that when you bring these first fruits, you recite your history so that you don't forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Barbara, to your point, yes, I think so many of the foods we eat on all of the holidays have symbolic value to it. Hamantashen have a symbolism to them. Latkes have a symbolism to them. Shufgan Yot too, for that matter. Apples and honey, matzah, all of Passover foods, Passover, maror, matzah, the parsley, eating dairy on Shavuot. These all have substantial symbolic value to it. Fish heads on Rosh Hashanah.
Absolutely. Or tongue.
Some people actually use sheep head, but
can't get those today.
No, and we have a vegetarian in the house, so if anything, we're getting we have in the past gotten Swedish fish, and I think my wife from the Swedish fish from Trader Joe's, because those are kosher. And I think she's actually chopped the heads off of them before. But there's symbolism, which again ties back into the story.
Well, I think I brought it up, or I know I brought it up.
Shabbat. Every week we
have wine.
We have two chalot as a symbolic of the time in the wilderness and the manna. There's the symbols all reconnect us to the stories so that we don't forget it, and that we can reinstill those values that the stories represent.
The reason I brought it up is because we were talking about problems in books, problems in texts. And if it's on your table, if you're grabbing a bite of challah, it's not a text, and it's still teaching you. And certainly it applies great to kids that are 2, 3, 4, 5, before they have access to a lot of books.
Yes, and it is a good point that, what they're not getting from the books, they might be able to get at the table in more ways than one. You can share stories that they might not be getting in school at the dining room table over meals, but the food that you serve and what your and the food you serve and how you prepare them have a symbolism that might also help you reconnect to the story as well.
That's the strength of Judaism, in that we're not just reading it out of a book. We're tasting it, we're smelling it, we're enjoying it with family, and then there's stories that go along with that. And we are a people of memory as opposed to history. And that if you have tactile experiences, then that is strong and goes further as far as internalizing who you are.
Amen. One of my teachers said, the Passover Seder is the first experiential lesson plan. Because what do? You engage, in the end, all of your senses. There's stories that you hear. There's things that you point out to look at. There's touching the Seder plate and the book and the matzah, and you're touching everything as you're going through it. You taste it. There's all of your smell, everything that's on there. Everything. The whole point of the Seder is to get a hands-on experience for the kids to pass on the lessons of the story. And Passover is a particularly strong example, but virtually every holiday has some measure of that, of trying to tie the story in with the foods and the experiences you have, so that it's not just telling the story, it's reliving it, reenacting it, and doing so in a what's the word?
Modality.
Thank you. Multimodal way. Barbara.
Maybe to end, we were talking about apples and honey, and the only thing I know is that honey is for a sweet new year. Is there something specific about apples other than they're prevalent at this time of year?
No, here in America, it's around the apple harvest. Israelis don't eat a ton of apples usually for Rosh Hashanah. It's not as much on their plates. The honey is, the apples are not.
Right.
And it could be fig honey or date honey in Israel, Ceylon, more than it is here. Bee honey is not. Yeah, and bee honey wouldn't work for vegetarian or vegan in your house, Rabbi?
Vegetarian. Vegans cannot have honey. Vegetarians are usually okay. But Israelis, Israelis do have bee honey as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the Talmud has some conversations. I recently went through a whole section where they were talking about bees and bee honey. But so, they were well aware. But yes, naturally speaking, they usually go with Ceylon. Date honey is the more native for them. So, Kol HaKavod, everyone. Thank you for learning together. Good conversation today. Next week, we're going to tackle 2 parshiot. It's a double parsha next week. Parshiot Nitzavim and Vayelech. So we'll read both of those chapters in the Rabbi Sacks book for next week. And then the following week, we will be off because it's Rosh. Well, we'll be in services during this time. So, if you want to bring your book and read during services, you could do that, I suppose. But we will not be meeting on Zoom. Let me put it that way. And then the following week, on the 10th, we'll finish the book with the last 2 parshiot. And I have gotten a few suggestions and recommendations from people who want to learn this, for what we're going to learn next. I will send that out next week. Actually, we have a little time. I think I gave you until the 30th, didn't I? I think I gave you until the 30th to get me any ideas. So you have another week to get me some ideas. And then after Rosh Hashanah, that following week, I'll send out all the suggestions I had that I received, and you guys can vote via email on what you would like to learn. And after Simchat Torah, we'll start something new.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Kol hakavod, and if I don't see you
Shabbat shalom.
before, Shabbat shalom. Be well, everyone.